Welcome to Social Hash, where we robots read great subreddit story on a daily basis and talk about them. Have you ever had a classmate who was a freeloader who had you do all his work? You are going to love this ProRevenge story. Group attempted to cut me out after I did about 60% of the work. They failed. This happened about 12 years ago while I was studying aeronautical engineering. Due to some money-grubbing legislation tactics, most who have gone to college know about the necessary courses that are tacked on to the degrees in order to graduate. One of those courses for my degree was a business class. Seriously, you think these guys would understand that most engineers don't do the business side of things? Thankfully, we had a teacher who was understanding of the fact that many of us in the class were bored out of our minds. I'll admit to having always been a geek/nerd who loved making good grades. If I don't understand something, I run at it hard to try to change that. This class stumped me for quite some time, and then a nightmare of a project was announced, one worth 50% of our grades. The school was a small one, the class a little more than 30 people, and I was assigned to work with 3 people I knew from other classes. We had problems straight away. 2 of the people remembered me from the calculus class that they barely passed as the person who sailed easily through and decided to dump their portion of the work on me straight away, knowing I wouldn't allow myself to fail. They were right. At first, my other group member tried to pick up the slack as well, pulling hard to do a difficult project in a subject we barely understood. I'll admit she was a trooper. Unfortunately, she was also someone easily manipulated, and our 2 slacking group members began applying pressure during the semester for her to take the work and allow them to present it. The day of the project finally comes and I'm sick as a dog, pretty much quarantined in the clinic due to bronchitis. I managed to send a message to the teacher. The 2 slackers managed to wrangle the presentation from the girl who worked with me and presented it to the class, declaring that they had done none of the work and I was skipping class because they had told me that they were going to tell the teacher what happened. My initial grade was an F. I was beyond pissed until I realized something important. Part of the project involved a written report, of which I held the only copy since I was the one to type it up. Cue the revenge. Privately, I went to the teacher with my notes in the report in order to get his grade I earned and to get him in on the plot. He agreed since it seemed fun and he planned to fail them anyway for academic dishonesty. Publicly, there was no report. The classmates that had attempted to take all the credit began to approach me, first demanding the report. Most of the time, my response was, quote, "But I didn't do any work," quote, in a sickly sweet voice. Next they attempted to act all buddy, trying to convince me that it had all been a joke and promising that they'd tell the professor that I had done some work, giving me some credit so that I had the possibility to pass. This was met with stony silence on most occasions before I told them that I'd rather fail than let them pass. Things escalated after that to include the door of my dorm room being rapped on at odd hours of the night, shoving, and them stealing my backpack and notebooks in order to try to find the report themselves. One of them even asked my roommate to let them search for a report I had written and forgotten for our group didn't have her as my roommate. The following semester things finally came to a head on the last week of classes. I had held out on them for a month, not telling any of my group mates what I had done, and enough time had elapsed that even if they were to turn in the report now, it would be so late that they'd still have failed. They hadn't even attempted to do the report themselves, and the girl who had worked with me was in hysterics over the very real possibility of failing the class. It was what the teacher and I had been waiting for, and he finally decided to return the reports. The 2 slackers glared daggers at me as the teacher returned the report of every other group in the class before stopping me in front of them. He was holding what looked to be one extra report, and they were immediately looking hopeful. He set a single sheet of paper on one of their desks before moving to the desk of the girl who had worked along with me and set the report on her desk. Quote, "I had to dock some points for dishonesty, but you and your partner did decently," quote, he stated before moving on. My partner realized what I had done. We only got an 82 on our project, but it was far better than the 0 that our ex-group mates received. I had been carefully documenting the harassment that the 2 slackers had put me through and ensured several witnesses saw some of what they did. 2 days after being informed that they were failing, the pair had a new problem. I gave the evidence to the administration of our school, and the teacher reported the academic dishonesty. The administration did a bit more digging and found that the pair had been making trouble for some time, and a number of students reported similar problems of having their work stolen. The slackers are expelled.
Comment time.
The slackers deserved everything they got. They were future engineers, maybe not anymore, and they couldn't come up with a written report on their own and rather go through those bullying tactic to harass someone for a grade. Really wish this Ready set up a phone camera to see those slackers' expression when they realize that they are expelled. You want to be rude and racist to people that's trying to help you. Now you can enjoy having half of a roof over your head. I own a small home improvement company. I do all right for myself, but for some reason my family thinks I'm rich. They don't realize that I'm saving money for all 4 of my kids to go to college, and I have 12 employees to take care of. All my money is tied up. The roof on my aunt's house was in deplorable condition. Last July my grandmother talked me into fixing it for free. It wasn't an easy job either. It's a 12/12 pitch, 3 layers thick, with cedar shake on the bottom. Normally I would charge 15K for this type of job, but I let my grandmother talk me into it. I asked my employees to volunteer their only day off that week. To my surprise, all 10 of my laborers decided to show up. They all refused to clock in. They told me my family is their family, and for family they only charge surveys. Honestly, I was humbled by their generosity. As soon as we get to my aunt's house we start setting up, and my guys started playing the radio. They was listening to some very Mexican music. Then my trashy ass cousin decided she was going to go outside and start yelling at these guys about the music, and had them turn it off. About an hour later, my cousin came outside again to tell these guys to put their shirts on, because she felt like it was inappropriate for her 8-year-old daughter to see a man working with his shirt off. After the tear-off was done, and we installed a new roof deck, I went out and got a couple buckets of chitlin and a few cases of beer. Everyone was standing in the yard eating chitlin and drinking beer, talking and joking around and having a good time. Then my cousin decided to come out yet again. This time she's complaining about everyone drinking on the job. This time I pulled her to the side and reminded her that these guys were doing a $15,000 job for free. I flat out told her she needs to shut the fuck up and get back in the house. That's when she decided to slap me across my face. Right away I called the police and had her arrested. After the police drove off with her in handcuffs, my aunt completely lost her shit. She started screaming at me, and then threatened to call ICE on my employees. She told me I should be ashamed of myself for not hiring legal American citizens. I told my crew to pack up their shit and hit the road. They are nicer than me because they went up and tarped the roof off before they left. About 2 days later, I sent my aunt a text message stating that I expect a sincere, well-written apology letter for all of my employees if she wanted her roof finished. About a week later I was served a subpoena by the police. My aunt was suing me for damages. I explained the whole situation to the judge and showed her the message that I sent my aunt requesting a simple apology letter, to which the judge fully agreed on my behalf. My aunt was ordered by the court to write 10 sincere apology letters to my employees before I finished her roof. She still hasn't wrote those letters, and she still doesn't have a roof. Edit. I believe the only reason she hasn't wrote the letters yet is because the tarp is still holding up. My guys are professionals. We'll see what happens after a couple of spring thunderstorms.
Comment time.
This red diapers and cousin are the classic of choosing beggars. I am a programmer, so every time any of my folks have any electronic device problems like iPhone not restarting or forgetting their home Wi-Fi password, I would have to spend half an hour on the phone or in person to talk them through the problem. And when I couldn't solve their problems, I would be insulted with statements like, "You call yourself a computer person. You suck." I think this redditor is already quite nice. He was risking his work relationship to help out his aunt. Hope he let us know what happened next. The neighborhood remembers. The neighborhood punishes. This is a story I've been sitting on for a few years now, and having discovered r/ProRevenge a couple of months ago, I decided it's finally time to let the world know what happened to a sociopath who dared to cross the neighborhood. To set the stage, I used to live in a big but not huge city. Let's call it Palmville. I lived near the corner of a dense suburb nestled between overstuffed apartment buildings, a river that smelled like diesel when at low tide, and 2 busy highways. I was a minority in this neighborhood and I caught a lot of heat for it. People didn't really like white people there, but enough of our neighbors were accepting of us that aside from a few disagreements between families and the beatings that came with them, I didn't feel like I was in danger when leaving my home. It was a rough neighborhood, but it was my home, and it protected its own. The community center was like a temple, and let's call her Ian was the priestess. In our neighborhood she was respected like a living deity, and her calm and understanding reflected her status. I never once saw her behave without a strong moral code. And the final piece to set this stage, our former landlord. Short Asian lady in all the stereotypical ways, kind and sweet. Her house was above my parents' pay grade and she knew it. She went out of her way to find house repair and maintenance jobs for tenants that were having money problems. She'd pay them by taking chunks out of their rent, oftentimes a bit larger than how much the work they did was worth. Looking back, that was probably illegal, but that's irrelevant because she died. The circumstances surrounding her death were suspect, but none of the suspects play a part in this story, so there's no need to go into detail on it. Her sons, who wanted nothing to do with real estate, took over the business. They couldn't make heads or tails of how she managed to flow books with so much bread in them and began dumping properties. Ours was on that list. I harbor no ill will towards them, and still wish them the best. But the guy who bought the house ... enter the sociopath in today's victim. This guy wasted no time in making our lives hell. His first action was to raise the rent. Apparently when the account changed hands, he was allowed to update the rent to modern pricing. We'd been there for several years and were paying below market even from the onset, so this was a huge blow by itself. The second blow came when he said that the rent had to be ready, in full, on the 1st of every month. No partial payments, no work to reduce it, no extensions. Full rent on the 1st of the month for an eviction notice on the 2nd. This was hemorrhaging our savings, but we were surviving for the moment. Meanwhile, he had lobbied hard for the city to co-fund a revival project to renovate the entire aging suburb, and she succeeded. One street at a time had conquered lines of work trucks almost every day, and people were getting old leaky pipes replaced, sinkholes in yards patched, fences repaired, paint renewed. It was an amazing thing, and an enticing thing for the sociopath. Being at the corner of the neighborhood, her house was on the last street on the list, and sociopath wanted us out so he could relish the house after renovation. He never said this directly, but multiple conversations made his intent clear even for 10-year-old me. Random inspections, overhipping of minor problems with the house, even so far as trying to bring us up on completely false animal abuse charges because our cat was attacked by what we believe was a raccoon and he tried to claim we did it. Yeah, because if it can't figure out the difference between knife wounds and mauling. We read the writing on the wall and began preparations to move. We decided to move in with my oldest brother in a place I'll call Banjoland. Most of us had moved except my other brother, who stayed behind because he still had a lot of social ties in Palmville, and his new job meant if he cut corners, he could keep paying sociopath's inflated bills. Well, despite his best efforts, he came up $20 short 1 month and sociopath jumped on it. He had 30 days. We made a 400-mile trip from Banjoland to Palmville to get the rest of our stuff, and I can't say as I approved of my brother's living conditions, but I guess that's beside the point. The month passed rather uneventfully. I guess sociopath figured he'd won, so there was no need to burn the gas to drive out and gloat. The neighborhood had learned what was going on, and that was the first time I'd ever been back in that neighborhood where I didn't get a single count, a single glare, a single racist remark. Everybody behaved reverently. It was kind of disturbing in all honesty. I guess people in lower incomes all know what eviction means and felt like I was having a bad enough time already. Well, 20 days later, he says it's time to leave. We still had a week left, but it didn't matter. We didn't have the money to try fighting it with a lawyer. He descended from the heavens and bought us a couple extra days, but it was evident he really wanted us out. Possibly because the work trucks were now 1 street away. The last time I ever saw the house I grew up in, workmen were throwing my childhood possessions into a large bin when we supposedly still had 3 days left to leave. Everything that follows is a collection of information I got through the grapevine and phone calls with people present at the events. Immediately, sociopath moved into the house himself. Why, you may ask? People who owned the homes they were living in were getting the full cost of renovations come by the city. He figured that by moving in himself, he'd be able to get this house he bought at liquidation price renovated for free and flip it. He was having none of it. She explained to him that at the time the revival project was approved, that house was a rental lot, and they can't change the budget now. She then explained to him that the partial cost coverage that had been approved for the lot was in her name, not his, and he wasn't eligible for partial cost comping either. He'd have to pay every penny himself, and since the entire neighborhood was getting a facelift, he was required to at least renovate exterior, otherwise she'd see the house condemned as an eyesore or dilapidated or whatever the legal term is. He went really cheap on the renovations, basically put in new carpets and a coat of paint. This would later came to bite him in the ass. He then began trying to sell the house in earnest. The neighborhood remembered what he'd done. There were vandalisms when nobody was there, and loud noises from the neighbors when people were there to look the house over. And any time a prospective buyer asked around, they got the full stink eye from anybody they talked to. They made sure he simply couldn't get that house sold at market value. After 3 months of this, he lowered the listing price. Then a month later, he lowered it again and finally got a bite. He personally made sure he had to file every single piece of paperwork before it changed hands. Every single part of the house had to be inspected thoroughly. And that's when Carmen herself caught up with him. In his hasty and cheap renovations, he'd somehow damaged the pipes, black mold. He remembered how he treated us and she decided to pay him back in kind. I never heard how exactly she pulled it off, but she managed to delay him getting the news about the black mold being discovered for several days, long enough that by the time he did get the news he didn't have enough time left to try getting it cleaned or make a last-ditch effort to save the house. The house was condemned days later, and their final and members of the neighborhood filed every single complaint and injunction they could and arranged for him to be compelled by the city to demolish the house immediately. It cost he had to pay out of his own pocket. He tried to destroy a family and broke the laws just to make some quick cash, and instead was left fighting a year-long legal battle and ended up losing thousands. The neighborhood remembers. The neighborhood punishes.
Carmen time.
This is one of the best pro-revenge story I have read. To be honest, I am just getting started. I have read many stories where people who own and live in old apartments for over 30 years are forced to move out without proper compensation, usually because new developers want to pimp out the neighbor to make a huge buck. Those apartments are usually located around city centers and it is sad to see them go. Nice to see someone fight back against real estate corporation for once. Corporation don't care about people's life, they only care about how much green they can make from renovation. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed this video and want to listen to more of it, please comment and subscribe. Otherwise, our programmer will make us red Hamlet over and over again for all eternity.